Here's what you're missing over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we are speaking with Lisa Samia. Many of you have probably heard her name before. Let me tell you a little bit about Lisa before we introduce her. Her most recent book is The Nameless and Faceless of the Civil War, Gettysburg, Manassas, and More. And we're going to be featuring some of the poems that she's written in that book today on the show. Prior to that, you might know one of her other books, The Nameless and Faceless of the Civil War, or The Nameless and the Faceless Women of the Civil War. In 2020, September of 2020, she was the artist in residence at Gettysburg, and in October of 2021, she was the artist in residence at Manassas. Unfortunately, though, for her, because of the pandemic and all that, she couldn't actually come to those battlefields and live there or reside there during that time, but she still won the prestige of being known as the artist in residence. And her books are collections of 28 poems and 28 historical essays on the Civil War. And let's welcome to the show right now, Lisa Samia. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me here today.
You're quite welcome. And thanks for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure.
I always, you never know if somebody's going to accept the invitation or not. So it's always nice when they do.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify, I wasn't able to complete my residency for Gettysburg because of COVID, but I was able to go to the one in Manassas and live on the battlefield.
Oh, okay, cool. So what's that like then, getting to live in a was it a historic home on the battlefield, or was it just like a modern day?
It was a park residence, and I will tell you that other than my marriage, that was the most exciting experience in my entire life.
Well, wow, that's nice.
I could not believe what it was like for someone like myself, who's there, to put on presentations, to walk the battlefield, to feel the battlefield, to envelop everything every single day, getting up, walking out the door and onto that battlefield. The inspiration that residency allowed me to create part of these works here, because it is Gettysburg and Manassas, most of the work. It was absolutely phenomenal. That experience, I can close my eyes and I can put myself on that battlefield, when I call it to my mind's eye. What an incredible experience. I wish everyone had that opportunity, because it will change you.
I imagine it would. I interviewed one of the artists in residence here several years ago, and she was staying at the
Klingel House.
The Klingel House. Thank you. It was escaping
that's where
me.
I was supposed to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're probably lucky that you didn't get to go there, because the thing's about to fall down on whoever's...
Yes, I followed that on National Park Service. I did see that they are shoring it up. Perhaps when they get it back together,
yes,
the program will be reinstated. Certainly, we always hope that. Yeah.
But I got to go in there and I got to see it. And have you ever been in there?
I have not, because it was, I couldn't get in. Yeah, I did see it through the window.
Well, it's like one of those fun houses. You feel like you're drunk, because as you go through, the floors are uneven. The walls are kind of also uneven, and it's it can really throw off your perception and everything. But I always thought, well, how cool would it be? And I've actually thought of applying for it to do podcasts out of like one of those homes or something like that. I think that would be cool, and kind of shut the world out for how long how long do you get to live there? A month?
A month. They are typically a month. Some are 3 weeks, and I was actually in Manassas living there for about 3.5 weeks. And it was in the fall, so getting up and walking out in the morning in the fall. I cannot say how wonderful it was any more than it was incredible. Plus, last summer was the 160th commemoration of Second Manassas, August of 2022, and how wonderful it was. They invited me back, and I was able to give 2 poetry presentations at the Stone House, again, right on the battlefield. So it's like the gift that keeps on giving.
It is. How does one go about getting that position? Is it difficult?
Well, I'll tell you what you need to do. First, you can go to the National Park Service website, and they will have enumerated different parks that do accept artists in residence. And there is a series of steps that you need to go through. You need to read carefully what they require. You have to put a narrative together, certainly. What is your purpose? State your purpose and supply your work, your CV. Some, if you want, you can have a reference letter. And they do have all forms of artistic medium. They have physical artists, sculptors, photographers, poets, things like that. So each one is a little bit different, but their application, you really do have to pay attention to exactly what they want. Because what they'll do is they'll filter, okay, this one doesn't have this doesn't have that.
Yeah. And
I understand, the competition's tough because, as some of these programs, through the National Park Service now, they're getting a little tighter. Funding is getting a little tighter. So with that, maybe they don't have as many. And or it might be a case of, again, they don't have it anymore, or the competition is steep. When you put your stuff in, you got to be 100%.
Do you know if is the Klingel House the only house that Gettysburg will use for that, or would they use another one until that's finished? Or do you not know?
That was the only. I don't have 100% answer, so I can't answer that. But that was the residence that I know several other AIRs were assigned to, but I don't know any other spot, nor has it ever been communicated to me. But I do know the National Park Service really would like to have me there on that battlefield reciting the poetry, because this gives a deeper dimension to the Civil War and everything that and a lot of the things that happened.
Well, so that brings us to my first question then.
Yep.
First of all, when did you get into writing poetry? What brought you to it?
I've always loved to write poetry. My first instance or inclination of poetry was in the 6th grade with Edgar Allan Poe's poem Annabel Lee.
Oh yeah,
that has stayed with me my entire life.
What about it? What was it about it What was it about that poem in particular that hooked you?
The longing, the cadence, the beauty, the imagery. I mean, you can see with your mind's eye exactly what Poe is stating in that poem. And it was so beautiful. And to this day, you can see that's my reference point. In my career, I worked in commercial real estate for over 28 years, and in management. And again, I always loved to write poetry. I always loved to write. I had a health crisis, Matt, and that sort of precipitated a move out of the real estate world. And again, it was management, commercial management. It wasn't, buying or selling. And to really step forward into this venue. And it has been an incredible experience thus far. So, yeah.
Good. So then did you always write about the Civil War, or was that something that you got into later? What would you write about when you first started writing poetry?
When I first started writing poetry, it was love poetry.
Of course.
I do have a love poetry book called The Man with the Ice Blue Eyes. And I was happy to say that came out in 2016, and I'm happy to say it. It debuted #1 on Amazon Poetry for Women. It stayed there all of 24 hours, but I can state that.
Yeah, you made it.
That didn't exactly fly off the shelf, but that's okay. But that was kind of where that started with the poetry. My love of the Civil War has started with my love of Lincoln. Okay, I've always loved American history. I love Lincoln. And what started this Nameless and Faceless was before it became a poetry collection. The Nameless and Faceless of the Civil War was actually a project that I had started with a former classmate of mine in school, and we were going to try to do, believe it or not, a virtual reality series.
Oh.
And unfortunately, years ago, and unfortunately, after a year, it just wasn't working, and so the project stalled. But the Nameless and the Faceless of the Civil War was a title I had come up with, so he was like, "Oh, go ahead." So I took that. And then with all of the research and study I had done for that project, sort of morphed into this to give those without a name or a face the opportunity to tell of their suffering during the war. That's how that happened.
And you say to tell of their suffering during the war.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think for me, the study of the war, of course, started with the Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, really, it started as a kid. I wouldn't call it study, though. It was a very casual exposure to it through going to Manassas when I would visit my aunt and uncle, or playing with the Doug relics that my uncle had on his bookshelf when I'd go visit. But the actual study, the interest in learning more about it started with Gettysburg. And until I would say maybe 2 or 3 years ago, all I cared about were tactics and strategies, casualties, maneuvers, things like that, the combat. But as I started addressing Gettysburg, I learned from the audience, really, people would say, "Can you do something about the civilians? Civilian this, civilian that. What about the women and all that other stuff?" And at first I was like, "Nah, I don't really care about that stuff." And then I realized, well, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for everybody, including me. So if I'm going to do it, if I'm going to be if I'm going to have any value to what I do, it has to be comprehensive. I have to cover all the aspects of it, and because that's the only way that anybody would ever get a full picture of things. So now I'm interested in what we call the human interest side of things. And it's opened my eyes to a lot of things, like all the romance of war that Hollywood has taught us to have, through all these, like the movie Gettysburg is even though it's 30 years old, at the time, I even think it was like, it reminds me of the last of the big epic films, like, what's that guy's name? The guy who did, Lawrence of Arabia, like those type of things where if you need if you need 15,000 soldiers on a battlefield, you find 15,000 extras, or, at least 5,000 or something like that, And so, all of that romance, that the pomp and circumstance, the pageantry of it all, it's very easy to get swept up in that, especially if there's a sweeping soundtrack behind it. But and you lose sight of the fact that this is misery. War is pure misery. As Sherman said, it's hell. And, it ruins lives, even the ones that survive, and thrive afterwards, seemingly unaffected by the war. They're certainly affected. We just don't see it. They don't show us. So what is it that, in particular, what's the particular sadness or I don't want to put a word in your mouth there, but what's the particular emotion that you feel that draws you to write poems about human interest stuff?
That's an excellent question, Matt.
Thank you.
And I will share with you that through the course of research, especially when I did the Nameless and Faceless Women of the Civil War, I had to read, or I wanted to read, and I did research many diaries written by women of that time. And to me, when I'm reading that, and maybe a lot of people out there don't know who this person was, or this person's referencing a woman who passed away. I mean, all of these things, but it was just so impactful for me. And then I realized, wait a minute, it's so hard to read. It's so hard to read. It's unbelievable. But then I said to myself, wait a minute. If these women, these individuals, soldiers, whoever it is sitting down and writing this, right, then we have to honor them by reading it. Mm-hmm. And then by translating that and then putting that into a poem or a story of that particular instance or person or whatever happened to them or someone they knew.
Listen to the rest of this interview and dozens like it. Support the show and get early access to special episodes, early and discounted ticket sales, and more. The second lieutenant level and above gets access to all monthly Patreon episodes. So please go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, choose a tier, and join. And I thank you in advance.